Tommy Robinson, Chapter 15, Enemy of the State. Part 1, read by David Clark. You are only supposed to do a maximum of 72 hours in solitary confinement when you're imprisoned in the British penal system, before your case is referred to the Home Secretary for consideration. I described earlier how I did the first stretch at Bedford Prison as a young man, saying that I reckoned I could handle it. You find a group of blokes you can relate to, talk to, hang with. There are basic comforts, exercise, activities, a television to watch, a reasonable representation of a social life, I suppose you could say. Solitary confinement, being what they call it, down the block, is very different indeed. When that case for illegally entering the USA arose, and because of the threats against me, I was usually asked if I wanted to go on the numbers, which meant did I want protection. That in turn meant did I want to be sectioned with all the various perverts and paedophiles kept away from the general population. No, I did not, thank you very much. If I meant risking my life in and amongst Islamic terrorists, so be it. I wasn't choosing to get myself locked away with those weirdos. I'd rather take my chances. It was an old-fashioned Luton pride thing, I suppose. Down the block, you are caged, in a room pretty much like a police cell, which is meant to, by definition, to be for temporary confinement. A concrete bed, with a thin plastic mattress on it, a toilet, and that, my friends, is that. Once a day you go out for a shower, make a phone call, then walk around the square metal box with no daylight whatever for half an hour, because solitary tends to be underground. It's a punishment for someone not showing themselves fit to be treated like a normal prisoner. It's designed to drive a man mad. It sure is. And if not, it's meant to take him as close to the limit as you can without resorting to torture. That's why there are strict rules about isolating people until they start trying to claw and eat their way through the walls or top themselves. You're supposed to be limited to a 28-day stretch in solitary. I did 22 weeks. The blokes who effectively live in solitary confinement because of being a danger to anyone, and anyone, including themselves, are not human beings in the way most civilised people would recognise the term. Before we dig deeper, however, I need to put in some perspective what my life outside the EDL had become, and specifically the way the British state was dealing with the Tommy Robinson problem. I've tried to be as honest as I can here, so far as memory serves, with the mistakes I've made, with the downright bloody stupid things I've done, but which seemed like a good idea at the time. I often knew it was going to end in tears, like the stunt on top of the FIFA building in Zurich. They're not exactly going to give you a limousine ride to the airport and upgrade you to the first class after an episode like that, are they? But sometimes making the point, fighting for the principle, has to be worth the minor inconvenience of a few £100 fine and a couple of days in a police cell. I'm really not trying to paint myself as some kind of martyr, because that's not how I see things. I'm just an ordinary bloke who got sick and tired of being a second-class citizen in his own town and in his own country. I simply decided that someone had to stand up and ask the question, what are we doing? Are we happy what we are allowing to happen to a country that our forefathers fought and died to preserve for their children and grandchildren? Do we know what we're risking by totally ignoring the issues that were slapping me in the face on a daily basis? Do we even know we're doing it? The moment we started the EDL, with me as the nominal head, the British state declared war on Tommy Robinson. Whether it was the police using arrest and detention as a way to either piss me off or disrupt EDL's activities, whether it was taking apart my working life going back to the year dot, or whether it was prison governors and screws physically throwing me to the lions by putting me on an open wing amongst violent Muslim extremists, I've had the lot thrown at me. The goal: to grind me down, to shut me up. That's all I can fathom. to make the point that the state can beat down anyone who thinks they can mess with it. If you can think of a better explanation for some of the tales I'm about to tell you, then I'd love to hear it. Sure, I've asked for trouble, and some, but to the extent of prison wardens locking me in a room with 3 violent Muslim prisoners who kicked me into the unrecognisable mess, that doesn't happen in a civilised country within a system like the United Kingdom, does it? Yeah, right, don't make me laugh. Not that I was doing much of that through broken teeth, with my head slashed to the skull and my eyes swollen shut. Just as I've tried to describe the journey of the EDL as an organisation, so I'll try to illustrate how, alongside it, the British state got to work, trying to cut the head off it. The police came looking for me right after the first UPL demo, and it didn't stop till the day I walked out of Peterborough Nick on the 24th of June 2015. Not even then, actually. A little while after the UPL arose out of the Royal Anglian Regiment's homecoming, in the very early days of the EDL, Kev and I were heading to talk to people from the Scottish Defence League in Edinburgh, when the pair of us rolled up at Luton Airport. I was arrested by Special Branch on suspicion of criminal damage and a radically aggravated incident. I hadn't a clue what they were talking about. They said they would be raiding properties linked to me, and sure enough they took my mum's house apart. Apparently there had been criminal damage at a hotel in Sheffield where we'd stayed after an early Leeds demo. According to Special Branch, I had asked a girl on reception where she was from. She happened to be from Afghanistan, and if anything, I was flirting with her. The young woman was clearly a headscarf-wearing Muslim, and we were 10 hoodie-wearing EDL members, so I made sure we were super nice. I told her that 2 of my best friends at school were from Afghanistan, Kamran and Imran. Meanwhile, the police said that the door fitting in the hotel corridor had been broken. It was a £30 fitting, and they sent 15 officers from Sheffield all the way to Luton, looking for proof that I had stayed there. They took my computer and arrested a friend who had booked the room. We had officers with machine guns at my house. They even seized my dad's business computer and kept it for 3 weeks. All over a £30 door fitting. How do they even get a warrant for all of that shit? Tell me it doesn't sound like something out of Soviet Russia. Our next demo after that was due to be at Bradford, where I was going to discuss sexual grooming by Muslim gangs. So the police bailed me to appear on the Saturday after that demo. My bail included conditions that I couldn't associate with more than 3 EDL members. You don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to work out what that was all about. There was no charges brought, a pattern that would be repeated time and time, but the warning signs were clear. I complained to the Independent Police Complaints Commission about that arrest, and when they eventually reached their conclusions, they sent the findings to an address I hadn't lived in for a long time. I eventually had to chase the complaint up more than 2 years later. And guess what? The UPPC upheld virtually every complaint I made and said it was taking disciplinary action against some of the officers involved. That broken £30 fitting in the Sheffield hotel? The IPCC inquiry found that the police had obtained a statement signed by the hotel manager, dated before they came and raided and arrested me, saying categorically that I had not done the damage. The manager then identified the culprit for them. Senior officers simply ignored that because, of course, it had nothing to do with the trumped-up charge and the fishing expedition they were on. Their warrant didn't allow the police to take away my business paperwork when they raided the house, so officers spent all day physically copying things out. About a £30 door fitting? Really? And as for the Muslim girl on reception, she hadn't complained about anything to anyone. The police had harassed her, quizzed her about what I said, and then they decided my asking where she was from constituted racially aggravated harassment. What? That sort of stuff only happens in a police state, doesn't it? They were only just warming up, folks. 2 months later, the doors went in again. This time, the Luton police arrested me on suspicion of money laundering and tax evasion. We'd had the road shut off the first time by armed police, with simultaneous raids at my house and my mum's. They even took the neighbours' drains up, putting cameras down them, and used held-hand scanners around our house walls looking for cavities where I might hide stuff. It took them 10 hours. For what? For nothing. That's what. I had to go and talk to the neighbours because it looked like I was Fred West. I had to tell them they were looking for evidence of unpaid taxes and investigating me for money laundering over the tanning salon. It all came to nothing, of course, after years of constant aggravation, but that wasn't much consolation to the people who had lived in the same street as us. Forget the terrorists. The authorities were making sure that we were pariahs among our neighbours. We had to move because my wife was embarrassed to take our little girl to school. Then the police came to give us that first Osman warning and placed officers outside the house, who might as well have turned up with a for sale sign, because the neighbours were understandably going spare. We had to move again. Later they would come to arrest my wife when she was 6 months pregnant, after absolutely nothing, and force us to get someone to come and look after our little girl. The copper was ashamed on that occasion and actually said, sorry. A lot of the ordinary police officers knew it was pure bullshit, that we were being persecuted for the sake of it. They froze my personal bank account and business account. They just walked into the tanning shop and took the computer. I had to close the business for 3 days. Mine and my dad's business, T&S Plumbing and Heating, was actually in his name and bank account. Barclays wrote to him out of the blue to say they were shutting his account down, just like that. No explanation. And not just his business account, but his personal account too, which he'd had for years. What was he supposed to have done wrong? Then I got an order saying that I couldn't spend more than £250 a week. I could go into the bank once a week to take out £250, and that was that. To keep and feed and clothe and house my family. No appeals, no hearings, nothing. Just the bastards hitting you on the head over and over again with a police state hammer, because they can. At the time, I was running a construction job, and I was taking home £880 a week. Plus, I had my plumbing work and a tanning shop. I'd already been to my accountant and gone through absolutely everything to make sure I was squeaky clean. But they spent months, years, trying to build a case. God alone knows how much money and resources they wasted. I was running jobs for a multimillionaire, Dave Richmond, back in 2006 and 7, Hollywood Dave as we called him. He had hundreds of properties, and I worked for a time on his Spanish portfolio. Dave had no kids, and he was great to us. We were like family. I learned a lot from him about property investment, picking up some good ideas on bank repossessions, things like that. Another pal too, CJ, who we nicknamed Businessman of the Year, I learned a lot from too. Suddenly, in 2009, 2010, the police were looking into those properties he'd acquired. Even though I had a mortgage on my own first home, I'd struggled to get finance because of the old dispute dating back to when I was not much more than a kid, about 20. I got a chance to buy a property for 100,000, which I knew I could sell for 150. I borrowed 70k from a friend and 30k from my brother, but they paid it directly to purchase the house. However, when it was then sold at a profit, the money went back through my account, at which point I repaid them. There was nothing wrong with it, except that it wasn't the regular mortgage style of buying a house. All the police could see, though, all they wanted to see was a bunch of money coming and going. Have you seen how Muslim families help each other buy houses, to avoid riba, paying interest, which is anti-Islamic. It was no different to that. Ironically, I was buying all of my plumbing gear for cash. You'll like this because I was dealing with a Muslim plumbers merchant in Barry Park and they were giving me a big discount for paying cash. Were they declaring everything to the taxman? That wasn't my problem, but on the day that I was supposed to go to trial, I gave the police piles and piles of receipts and invoices with every single penny accounted for. I had had a major problem during that case because the police didn't bring charges for 3 years. The bank only kept 6 years of customer records, and the police got them when they began the investigation. By the time I knew the police were intent on charging me, and I went to the bank for the records, it was the same 6-year limit. The police had 3 years of my records that I didn't. They added up every penny that came in, declared it all an income, whether it was or not, came up with a total sum of £300,000 unexplained income, and said I owed £137,000 in tax. Eventually, I had to employ a forensic accountant, and it was a massive job proving that a specific item was a loan from a friend or relative, or even winnings from a William Hill betting account. He said he had never ever seen a stitch-up job like the one the police and the CPS were pulling. They even used Noel Lucas QC, one of their very best go-to barristers. They wasted his time though, because the judge took one look at my accounts report and threw the case out. I had to answer bail every 6 weeks for 4 years, and in the end there was simply no case. All I was guilty of was having messy accounts. After 4 years, every penny came back as legit. Meanwhile, during my time at the head of EDL, I'd run out of cash myself. They had driven me to my knees. Mum had even remortgaged their house in order to help us out, keep us afloat, and yet, at the end of everything, the police, the state had nothing. But they wasn't finished, and this time they were going to play really dirty. After the M25 arrest, I was remanded in Wandsworth and put on solitary over the passport stunt. Not quite robbing the crown jewels or systematically raping dozens of white school children over 20 years, was it? But still, no money was enough to get me bail. I think I knew that I needed to be in prison, or at least somewhere out of the limelight, and in those first 8 weeks inside, I sobered up and straightened out and spent a lot of time thinking about my life, what my life had become, what the people around me, my family, who, for some unfathomable reason, still loved me, were having to endure because of my selfishness.